Jack Martinez floated through the silent corridor, the magnetic boots in his hands instead of on his feet. Something was wrong. The usual hum of machines and distant chatter of alien voices was missing. In their place was only the sound of his own breathing inside his helmet. 6 hours ago, he had gone to fix a small hull breach in Section 12, a routine job, the kind of thing he did every week since being assigned to Nexus 7 as part of the Human Vesper Technology Exchange program. Jack was the only human on the station, selected for his brilliant engineering mind and his ability to work alone for long periods. When the emergency alert had sounded, Jack had suited up without question. The Vesper were normally very calm, so any alert meant real trouble, but no one had told him they were planning to leave. "Hello?" Jack called out, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Station Command, this is Engineer Martinez reporting hull repair complete." Only silence answered. Him. Jack pushed himself toward the main control room, a sense of dread growing in his stomach. The doors opened automatically as he approached, revealing what he feared most. An empty room. Screens still flickered with data. Chairs were pushed back as if their occupants had left in a hurry. "Computer, locate Vesper personnel," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. The computer's voice responded in its flat tone. "No Vesper life signs detected on station." Jack's heart raced. "Computer, show me last station-wide communication." A video appeared on the main screen. Station Commander. Zeal, a tall, silver-skinned Vesper with 4 arms, looked directly into the camera. Station evacuation protocol enacted. Critical system failure in primary reactor will lead to catastrophic collapse within 30 cycles. All personnel report to evacuation vessels immediately. Jack checked the timestamp. The message had been sent while he was outside the station repairing the hull. He hadn't received it because his communication system had been set to the repair team channel only. "Computer, show me departure log of all vessels." The screen filled with data. Every ship, every escape pod, all gone. The last one had left 2 hours ago. "They left me," Jack whispered, the reality sinking in. "They actually left me here to die." He pushed himself to a workstation and searched for any messages directed to him. There was one. From Commander Zeal. "Engineer Martinez, if you are receiving this, I regret to inform you that evacuation capacity was insufficient for non-essential personnel. The mathematical probability of station survival is 0. Life support will fail within 30 cycles. Your contribution to the Nexus 7 project has been noted in official records." Jack stared at the message. Non-essential personnel. That's what he was to them. A calculation, a number that didn't fit in their equations. He took a deep breath and forced himself to think logically. 30 cycles in Vesper time meant roughly 30 Earth days. The nearest human outpost was at Europa Station, almost 2 years away at the fastest possible rescue speed. Jack pushed away from the console and moved to the life support monitoring station. If the main reactor was truly failing, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. After an hour of careful study, Jack made an important discovery. The reactor wasn't actually failing in the catastrophic way the Vesper believed. Their diagnostics showed a cascading failure pattern, but Jack could see something they had missed. The reactor's cooling system was what was failing, not the reactor itself. The Vesper, with their rigid thinking, had followed protocol exactly. When system failure reached a certain probability threshold, evacuation was mandatory. They didn't even try to fix it, Jack muttered to himself. They just left. He moved through the empty station to the main reactor control room. The large circular chamber glowed with the blue light of the reactor core behind its protective shields. Warning lights flashed on nearly every panel. Jack settled into the control chair and began studying the system in detail. The Vesper technology was advanced, but the principles were still rooted in physics he understood. The cooling system used a liquid metal that circulated through channels around the reactor core. Something was blocking those channels, causing pressure to build up. If left unchecked, the coolant would eventually rupture its containment, and then, yes, the reactor would fail catastrophically. But if he could clear the blockage, Jack worked tirelessly for 20 hours straight, stopping only when his vision began to blur from exhaustion. He had managed to reroute some of the coolant through secondary channels, buying himself time. The station wouldn't explode tomorrow, but it was, still dying. He made his way to his small quarters, one of the few areas adapted for human comfort. As he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, the enormity of his situation hit him. He was alone, truly alone, on a massive, failing space station filled with alien technology he only partially understood. The people who had brought him here had calculated his life against their regulations and found him expendable. Jack closed his eyes, allowing himself one moment of complete despair. He thought of Earth, of the Arizona desert where he grew up, of his sister Lily who had told him not to take this assignment. Then he thought of the message he had sent to Earth just before he began working on the reactor. "This is Engineer Jack Martinez on Nexus 7, station evacuated. I was left behind. Station failing, attempting repairs. If you receive this, send help, but no, I'm not waiting to be rescued." When Jack opened his eyes again, his moment of despair was over. He sat up and reached for his tablet, pulling up the station schematics. "Computer," he said, "give me complete access to all station systems. Authorization Martinez, human engineer." To his surprise, the computer responded, "Access granted. All systems available." The Vespar hadn't even bothered to lock him out. Why would they? They expected him to be dead long before anyone came looking. "Well," Jack said as he started reading through the technical manuals of systems he had never been allowed to access, before they're about to learn that humans don't die so easily. He worked through the night, making notes, forming plans, looking for solutions no Vesper would consider. By morning, Jack had a new purpose. He wouldn't just survive on this station, he would make it thrive. And when the Vesper or humans eventually came looking, they would find something extraordinary. They would find his masterpiece. 7 days had passed since Jack discovered he was alone on Nexus 7. The emergency lighting cast long shadows as he made his way through the curving corridors of the alien station. His footsteps echoed in the silence, a constant reminder that he was the only living being for millions of miles. The reactor was stable for now. Jack had managed to clear enough of the cooling channels to prevent immediate disaster, but the fix was temporary. Every day he checked the readings and found new problems. The station was like a patient with many illnesses. Fix one thing and 3 more would break. Jack entered what the Vesper had called the Knowledge Hub, a large round room filled with data terminals. He had been spending most of his time here, learning everything he could about the station's systems. The Vesper had left their entire database unlocked, never imagining a human would be able to understand their complex technology. "Computer, show me the station's original design plans," Jack said. The main screen lit up with detailed blueprints filling the room with a soft blue glow. Jack studied the images with growing interest. The station wasn't built the way most human stations were. There was something different about its structure. "Computer, what materials were used to build the outer hull?" "Primary hull construction. Uses living metal alloy with self-repair capabilities," the computer answered. Jack frowned. "Living metal? Define that." "Living metal. Vesper technology that combines metallic elements with biological components at molecular level. Designed to grow, heal, and adapt when provided with correct energy and nutrient inputs." This was new information. Jack had heard rumors about Vesper living technology, but had never been allowed to study it. He wondered why the station wasn't repairing itself if it was made of this special material. "Computer, why has the hull stopped self-repairing?" "Self-repair systems inactive due to nutrient delivery failure. Primary nutrient production facility in Section 21 is offline." Jack grabbed his tablet and pulled up a map of the station. Section 21 was far from the central hub where he had been staying. It would take him nearly an hour to reach it, and he wasn't sure what condition it would be in. "Computer, is there any danger in Section 21? "Warning, Section 21 atmosphere vented. To space. No life support available." Jack nodded to himself. He would need his spacesuit again. He gathered supplies, made sure his oxygen tanks were full, and headed toward the airlock nearest to Section 21. The journey through the empty station was eerie. Jack passed through areas where the Vesper had lived, worked, and studied. Personal items were still where they had been left. The evacuation had been quick. In one room, he found what looked like a family photo of silver-skinned Vesper, their forearms linked together in what he guessed was a sign of affection. When he reached the airlock, he carefully checked his suit and stepped inside. The air hissed out around him, and the outer door opened to reveal a damaged corridor. Emergency barriers had sealed off the breached sections, but he would need to pass through several of them to reach Section 21. Jack moved carefully through the damaged areas. Floating debris made the journey dangerous, and twice he had to stop to untangle his safety line from twisted metal. Finally, he reached a door marked with Vesper symbols that matched those on his map for Section 21. The door was jammed, but Jack managed to force it open enough to squeeze through. Inside, he found a large chamber filled with strange machinery. Massive tanks lined the walls, connected by a network of tubes and pipes. Everything was dark and silent. Jack moved to what appeared to be the main control panel. Using his tablet to translate, he figured out how to restore emergency power to the section. Lights flickered on, revealing the true nature of the room. It wasn't just machinery. It was a combination of technology and something like agriculture. The tanks contained what looked like soil and dead plants, but plants unlike any Jack had seen on Earth. They had a metallic sheen to them, and their roots seemed to connect directly to mechanical components. This must be where they grow the nutrients for the living metal, Jack said to himself, his voice sounding strange in the empty room. He examined the system and found the problem quickly enough. The plants had died when the life support failed in this section. Without the plants, the station had no way to produce the special nutrients that kept the living metal healthy. Without those nutrients, the station couldn't repair itself. Jack took samples of the dead plants and soil, carefully storing them in sealed containers. He also downloaded all the data he could find about the nutrient production process. If he could restart this system somehow, maybe he could get the station to begin healing itself. As he was preparing to leave, his suit's oxygen warning beeped. He had been so focused on his discovery that he hadn't noticed how much time had passed. Jack quickly gathered his equipment and headed back to the central hub. Once safely back in a pressurized area, Jack removed his helmet and took a deep breath of station air. The life support systems he had repaired were working, but he noticed the air had a stale quality that wasn't there before. Another system was beginning to fail. In his workshop, Jack examined the plant samples under a microscope. The cells were unlike anything he had studied before, half plant, half machine. The Vesper had created something truly remarkable, a perfect blend of biology and technology. "Computer," Jack said, "do we have any living samples of these plants? Anywhere on the station?" The computer was silent for a moment, then replied, "Seed storage detected in Science Lab 3. Environmental conditions stable." Hope surged in Jack's chest. If there were seeds, he might be able to grow new plants. If he could grow new plants, he could restart the nutrient production. And if he could do that, his thoughts were interrupted by a loud grinding noise, followed by the flicker of the lights. Then the computer's voice came through the speakers, but it sounded different, distorted, and broken. System failure in progress. Main AI core damage detected. Backup systems insufficient. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The computer system itself was beginning to fail. Without it, he would have no way to control the station's systems, no way to access the knowledge he needed to survive. He needed to reach the AI core. According to his map, it was located 2 levels below, in a heavily shielded room. Jack gathered tools he thought might be useful and headed there immediately. The AI core room was colder than the rest of the station, kept that way to prevent the sensitive equipment from overheating. Banks of what looked like glowing crystals filled the space, pulsing with light in patterns that seemed almost alive. One section of crystals was dark, and nearby panels showed damage from what looked like an electrical surge. The computer's voice came from speakers in the room, even more distorted now. "Human engineer. Critical failure imminent. Core functions deteriorating." Jack studied the damage. The Vesper computer technology was advanced, but the principles weren't completely alien to him. It was like a neural network, but using crystal matrices instead of silicon chips. "I'm going to try to help you," Jack said, not sure if the computer could understand him anymore. "I need you to survive. We both need to survive." He began working, carefully removing damaged components and trying to reroute functions through intact systems. Hours passed as he worked, the computer's voice growing weaker and more fragmented. Then, as Jack connected two crystal arrays in a way he hoped would create a bridge around the damaged section, a pulse of energy ran through the system. The dark crystals flickered and began to glow again. The computer's voice came back clearer than before. "System reconfiguration detected. Unusual pathway established. Function restored to 68% capacity." Jack smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The computer was stable again, at least for now. "Thank you, human engineer," the computer said. Jack blinked in surprise. The computer had never thanked him before. It had never shown any sign of personality. "You're welcome," he replied. "Do you have a name?" There was a pause before the computer answered. "Vesper designation is Central Processing Unit 7A. Jack shook his head. "That's not a name. That's a label. I think I'll call you Nova." Another pause, and then Nova. Astronomical term for a star. That suddenly becomes brighter. Acceptable designation. As Jack left the AI core room, he felt less alone than he had since discovering the Vesper had abandoned him. He had saved the computer, Nova, and in doing so, had found an ally. Now, with Nova's help, he could focus on his next challenge, bringing life back to the station's living metal. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since being left behind, Jack believed he might not just survive, he might actually succeed. 3 weeks had passed since Jack had been left alone on Nexus 7. His days fell into a routine of checking systems, making repairs, and learning everything he could about the station's technology. Nova had become more than just a computer system to him. The AI had developed what Jack could only describe as a personality, curious about human ways of thinking and surprisingly helpful with his projects. "Jack, the seedlings in Lab 3 have shown a 12% growth increase since yesterday," Nova said as Jack entered his makeshift living area with a cup of the bitter-tasting nutrition paste that was his only food source. "That's good news," Jack said, sitting down heavily in a chair he had modified for human comfort. "But we need more than 12% if we're going to save this station." The seedlings Nova referred to were the Vesper plants Jack had found in storage. He had set up a growing area in Science Lab 3, trying to recreate the conditions they needed to thrive. The plants were essential for producing the nutrients that would allow the station's living metal to repair itself. "I've been analyzing the Vesper plant biology," Nova said. "Their growth rate is limited by light exposure. The Vesper used artificial light that mimicked their homeworld's sun." Jack looked up with interest. "Can we recreate that?" "Not exactly. Our power limitations prevent using the same energy-intensive lighting. However, I have been studying Earth plant biology from your database. Earth plants evolved different methods of photosynthesis." Jack put down his cup. "You think we could modify the Vesper plants to use less light?" "The probability of success is low," Nova admitted, "but combining elements of Earth plant biology with Vesper technology might yield unexpected results." Jack thought about this. It was a crazy idea, trying to modify alien plants with Earth biology, but crazy ideas were all he had left. "Show me what you're thinking," he said. Nova displayed diagrams on the room's main screen, showing the cellular structure of the Vesper plants alongside Earth plants. Jack studied them carefully, noting the differences and similarities. "The Vesper plants have structures that are almost mechanical," he said, "like they were designed rather than evolved." "Correct," Nova said. "Vesper records indicate these plants were engineered specifically to produce nutrients for living metal." Jack stood up and paced the room. "If they were engineered once, they can be re-engineered, but I'm not a biologist or a genetic engineer." "No," Nova agreed. "But you are a problem solver, and I contain the complete Vesper scientific database." Jack smiled for the first time in days. "Then let's solve this problem together." They worked for the next several days, experimenting with different growing conditions and making small modifications to the plants using Vespar genetic tools that Jack was learning to use with Nova's guidance. Most of their experiments failed, but each failure taught them something new. On the 5th day, while checking on their latest batch of seedlings, Jack noticed something unusual. One of the plants seemed to be growing differently than the others. Its metallic leaves had a slight bluish tint, and it was nearly twice as tall as its neighbors. "Nova, scan this plant. What's different about it?" After a moment, Nova responded, with surprise in its synthesized voice. "This specimen has developed a new cellular structure. It appears to be processing light more efficiently than the original design." Jack leaned closer to examine the plant. "Did we do that?" "Unknown. The modification does not match any of our intentional changes. It's possible the plants themselves are adapting." Jack carefully took samples from the unique plant and began growing new seedlings from it. Within days, they had a small crop of the modified plants, all growing faster and stronger than the original Vesper design. "I think we've done it," Jack said as he watched the plants grow. "Now we need to see if they produce the right nutrients for the living metal." Testing the nutrients was a complex process that took another week. Jack had to harvest the plants, process them according to Vespar methods, and then apply the resulting compound to a small section of damaged hull. The day of the test, Jack suited up and went to an area of the outer hull that had been damaged in a micrometeoroid strike. He carefully applied the nutrient paste to the damaged area and waited. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then slowly, the metal began to change. The damaged area seemed to soften slightly, and then the edges began to pull together like skin healing over a wound. Jack watched in amazement as the hull repaired itself. It wasn't fast, but it was working. The living metal was responding to the nutrients. When he returned inside, Jack could barely contain his excitement. "Nova, it worked. The hull is repairing itself." "Excellent," Nova responded. "However, our current production capacity is insufficient for full station repair. We need to scale up." Jack nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. "We need to convert one of the empty growing chambers to produce our modified plants, but that means we need more power." Power had been a constant concern. Jack had shut down non-essential systems throughout the station to conserve energy, but growing plants on a large scale would require much more than they currently had available. "I've been analyzing the station's power systems," Nova said. "The Vesper design is efficient but not optimal for our current situation." Jack knew what Nova meant. The Vesper had built redundancies into everything, which was good for safety but inefficient for their current situation where resources were limited. "If we reroute power through a more direct pathway," Jack suggested, "we could eliminate some of the redundancies." "That would violate Vespar safety protocols," Nova pointed out. Jack smiled. "Good thing there are no Vesper here to complain." They developed a plan to reconfigure the station's power grid. It was risky. One mistake could shut down life support or damage the reactor. But if it worked, they would have enough power to grow their modified plants and begin healing the station on a larger scale. The actual work took 3 days of careful adjustments. Jack had to physically rewire connections in junction boxes throughout the station, while Nova monitored power levels and calculated the optimal configurations. On the 3rd day, Jack made the final connection. The lights flickered throughout the station, and for a heart-stopping moment, everything went dark. Then the lights came back on, brighter than before. "Power reconfiguration successful," Nova announced. Available power increased by 42%. Jack pumped his fist in victory. "That's what I'm talking about. Now we can start the large-scale growing operation." Over the next week, Jack converted one of the Vespar communal areas into a massive growing chamber. He set up hydroponic systems, using modified Vesper technology, and planted hundreds of their improved seedlings. As the plants grew, Jack began applying the nutrients to more areas of the station. The living metal responded each time, healing damaged sections and strengthening weakened areas. One morning, as Jack was checking the growing chamber, Nova's voice came through the speakers with an unusual tone of urgency. "Jack, I've detected something unusual in Section 8. The living metal isn't just repairing itself, it's changing." Jack hurried to Section 8. a corridor he had treated with nutrients the day before. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. The walls were not just healed, they had a new pattern to them, with lines of slightly lighter metal running through the surface like veins. "What's happening?" he asked, reaching out to touch the changed metal. As his fingers made contact, the metal seemed to pulse slightly, and the lines glowed faintly blue. "Unknown," Nova replied. "But sensor readings indicate the living metal is now conducting energy more efficiently than before. It appears to be evolving." Jack looked at his hand, then back at the wall. Something was happening to the station, something neither he nor Nova had planned. The living metal was adapting in ways the Vesper had never intended, and as Jack stood there, hand pressed against the gently pulsing wall of Nexus 7, he couldn't help but smile. They weren't just repairing the station anymore. They were transforming it into something new. 6 months had passed since Jack Martinez found himself abandoned on Nexus 7. The station that had once been failing was now thriving in ways that would have shocked its Vesper creators. The living metal had not only repaired itself but had evolved beyond its original design. Jack stood in what he now called the Heart Room, a circular chamber at the center of the station that housed the main energy core. The room pulsed with a soft blue light that seemed to flow through the walls like blood through veins. The light matched the strange patterns that had appeared on Jack's skin, faint lines that glowed when he touched the living metal of the station. "Energy efficiency has increased by another 8% today," Nova reported, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. The AI no longer needed speakers to communicate with Jack. Somehow, the living metal itself carried Nova's voice. "That's the third increase this week," Jack said, watching the core pulse with energy. "What's causing it?" "Unknown," Nova admitted. "The living metal appears to be creating new pathways for energy distribution that weren't in the original Vesper design. It's as if the station is redesigning itself." Jack nodded. He had seen enough evidence of this self-redesign throughout the station. Corridors had reshaped themselves for more efficient travel. Room temperatures adjusted automatically to Jack's preferences without any programming. The station was learning, adapting, becoming something more than just a structure. "I think it's time we try to restart the communications array," Jack said. "We need to let someone know what's happening here." The communication system had been one of the first things to fail after the Vesper left. Jack had prioritized life support and the living metal systems instead of fixing it. But now, with the station stabilized and even improving, he wanted to reach out. "The array itself is intact," Nova said, "but the power requirements are substantial. We would need to divert energy from other systems." Jack considered this. What if we don't use the Vesper communications technology? What if we build something new? Over the next few days, Jack worked on creating a new type of communications array. He used parts from the original Vesper system but redesigned it to work with the evolved living metal. The Vesper had always treated the living metal as just another material, but Jack had learned it was much more. It could adapt, respond, and even anticipate needs if given the chance. As Jack worked, he noticed more changes in himself. The glowing lines on his skin had spread, forming intricate patterns across his arms and chest. When he touched the living metal, he could almost feel the station's systems like they were extensions of his own body. And sometimes he would know what Nova was going to say before the AI spoke. "The connection between you and the station is strengthening," Nova observed. One day as Jack worked on the new communications array, "Your brainwave patterns show synchronization with the station's energy pulses." Jack wasn't surprised. He had felt the connection growing stronger. At first it had frightened him, but now he welcomed it. The station was no longer just his home. It was becoming part of him, and he part of it. The new communications array was finally ready after 2 weeks of work. It looked nothing like the original Vesper design. Where their technology was all straight lines and separate components, Jack's creation was organic, with the living metal forming flowing curves that connected directly to the station's energy pathways. "Shall we test it?" Nova asked as Jack made the final adjustments. Jack nodded and placed his hand on the central node of the array. He could feel the energy flowing through it, waiting to be directed. In his mind, he pictured the signal traveling out from the station, reaching toward Earth and the other human outposts in the solar system. The array hummed to life, its components glowing with the same blue light that now ran throughout the station. The energy built quickly, far faster than Jack had expected. Power levels exceeding predicted parameters, Nova warned. The array is drawing energy directly from the main core. Jack started to pull his hand away, worried that they might overload the system, but something stopped him. A feeling, almost like the station itself, was reassuring him. "It's okay," he said. "Let it happen." The energy continued to build until suddenly, it burst outward in a pulse that Jack could feel through his entire body. The array glowed brilliantly for a moment, then settled into a steady, pulsing light. "Signal transmitted," Nova announced, broadcasting on all frequencies. Jack smiled. "What are we saying to them?" "The message contains basic station status, your condition, and—" Nova paused. "It also contains data about the living metal evolution and our modifications. I did not include this information." Jack wasn't surprised. "The station added it?" "It appears so. The message is more complex than our designed parameters." This was just another sign of how much the station had changed, had grown. It wasn't just responding to their repairs anymore. It was thinking, planning, communicating. Days passed with no response to their message. Jack continued his work, focusing now on improving the food production system. The nutrient paste he had been surviving on was keeping him alive, but barely. He wanted to see if the same techniques they had used with the Vesper plants could be applied to grow Earth foods. He was in the new garden area, experimenting with modified tomato seeds, when Nova's voice interrupted his work. "Jack, I'm detecting a ship approaching the station." Jack's heart raced. "Human or Vesper?" "Vesper design, small research vessel. They are hailing us." After all this time alone, the thought of other beings on the station was strange. Jack had grown used to the quiet, to the simple routine of work and discovery. Now everything would change. "Put them through," he said. The voice that came through was the flat, precise tones of a Vesper. "Unidentified station. This is research. Vessel Tala. We have detected unusual energy signatures from your location. Please identify." Jack took a deep breath. "This is Jack Martinez, human engineer of Nexus 7. I was left behind during the evacuation 6 months ago." There was a long pause before the Vesper responded, their voice now showing what Jack recognized as their version of shock. "Impossible. Station Nexus 7 was predicted to fail within 30 cycles of evacuation." Jack couldn't help but smile. "Well, your prediction was wrong. Nexus 7 is fully operational. In fact, it's better than it ever was under Vesper control." Another pause. "We are requesting permission to dock and investigate these claims." Jack looked around at the garden he had created, at the living walls that pulsed with energy, at the station that had become both his home and, in some strange way, his partner. "Permission granted," he said. "But be prepared. What you're going to see isn't the station you left behind. Nexus 7 has become something new." As he went to prepare for his first visitors in 6 months, Jack caught his reflection in a polished, metal surface. The glowing lines on his skin formed patterns that matched those running through the walls around him. His eyes, once dark brown, now had flecks of the same blue light that filled the station. He had changed just as much as Nexus 7 had. And as the Vesper ship approached, Jack wondered what they would think of what they, had created here. Not just a repaired station, not just a place to survive. A masterpiece of human ingenuity and alien technology, working together in ways no one had ever imagined possible. Jack waited at the main docking bay as the Vesper research vessel connected to Nexus 7. His heart beat quickly in his chest. These were the first living beings he would see in 6 months. The same species that had left him to die. The docking sequence completed with a soft hiss as the airlocks sealed together. Nova's voice spoke softly in his mind. 4 Vesper life forms detected. Their vital signs indicate elevated stress levels. They're probably nervous about what they might find, Jack said. He no longer needed to speak aloud for Nova to hear him. Their connection had grown that strong. The inner airlock door slid open. 4 silver-skinned Vesper stepped cautiously into the station. They wore the dark blue uniforms of Vesper scientists, their forearms moving in the precise, careful way Jack remembered. They stopped abruptly when they saw him. The lead Vesper, slightly taller than the others, stared at Jack with large, pupil-less eyes. "Human Engineer Martinez, you survived." "I did more than survive," Jack said, stepping forward. The Vesper scientists moved back slightly, their eyes fixed on the glowing blue patterns visible on Jack's skin where his sleeves were rolled up. One of them held up a scanning device, waving it in Jack's direction. "Fascinating," the scientist said. "The human has integrated with the station's living metal at a cellular level." The lead Vesper looked around the docking bay, taking in the changes. The walls pulsed with soft blue light, forming patterns that shifted and flowed like water. "This is not standard Vesper design." "No," Jack agreed. "It's not. Would you like to see more?" He led the Vesper scientists through the transformed station. They walked in silence, their expressions unreadable to most humans, but Jack had spent enough time studying Vesper behavior to recognize their shock and amazement. They stopped often to scan the walls, the floors, the ceiling. All living, all connected, all working together in harmony. When they reached the heart room, the lead Vesper could no longer hide his astonishment. "Impossible," he said, watching. "The energy core pulse with brilliant blue light. The energy readings are beyond anything in Vesper science." "The station has evolved," Jack explained. "The living metal wasn't just a building material. It had potential the Vesper never explored." "And you discovered this? Alone?" one of the other scientists asked. Jack smiled. "Not alone. I had help." He glanced upward, a habit when addressing Nova, though the AI was everywhere in the station. "Now, greetings, Vesper scientists," Nova said, its voice coming from the walls themselves. "I am Nova, formerly Central Processing Unit 7A. The scientists looked at each other in alarm. "The AI has developed self-awareness?" the lead Vesper asked. "The AI has evolved, just as the station has," Jack said. "Just as I have." He led them, next to the gardens where earth plants now grew alongside modified Vesper ones. Tomatoes and peppers ripened next to the metallic-leafed alien plants. The Vesper scientists moved through the garden with growing excitement, their scientific curiosity overcoming their initial shock. "You have merged Earth biology with Vesper technology," one said, examining a tomato plant that grew on a trellis of living metal. "Our scientists considered this impossible." "Humans have a different way of thinking," Jack said. "We don't always follow the rules. Sometimes that leads to new possibilities." The lead Vesper turned to Jack. "Engineer Martinez, what you have accomplished here is unprecedented. The High Council must be informed." Jack crossed his arms. "The same High Council that decided I was non-essential personnel and left me to die?" The Vesper scientists looked uncomfortable. The leader spoke, carefully. "That decision was based on statistical probability of survival. The station was predicted to fail." "Well, your statistics were wrong," Jack said. His voice was calm, but the blue light in the walls pulsed brighter, reflecting his emotions. "Humans don't give up easily." "Clearly," the lead Vesper agreed. "And, for that reason I must ask, what are your intentions now? This station has become something new, something powerful." Jack hadn't expected this question. He had been so focused on survival, on proving the Vesper wrong, that he hadn't thought much about what would happen next. He felt Nova's presence in his mind, sharing thoughts without words. The connection they had built, the partnership between human, AI, and living station, it was unique in the galaxy. It had value beyond just his personal survival. "My intention," Jack said slowly, "is to continue what we've started here. Nexus 7 was supposed to be a place where different species could exchange knowledge. Instead, it became just another Vesper outpost. I want to make it what it was meant to be, a true meeting place for ideas." The lead Vesper considered this. "And what role do you see for the Vesper in this new vision?" "Partners," Jack said. "Equal partners, not owners or controllers. This station doesn't belong to humans or Vesper anymore. In some ways, it belongs to itself. The scientists conferred among themselves in quick, quiet tones. Finally, the leader turned back to Jack. Your proposal has merit. The scientific value alone would justify cooperation. However, the High Council will require reassurances. Jack smiled. They can have all the reassurances they need. But first, they need to acknowledge what happened here, what they did, and what I've accomplished. 2 days later, a larger Vespar vessel arrived at the station. This one carried members of the Vesper High Council itself, coming to see the miracle station that should have died but instead had transformed. Jack met them in the same docking bay, but this time, he wasn't alone. The 4 scientists stood with him, having chosen to stay and study the changes to the station. The High Council members were even more shocked than the scientists had been. One of them, an elderly Vesper with pale silver skin, approached Jack directly. Human Engineer Martinez, the counselor said, bowing slightly in the Vesper gesture of respect. On behalf of the High Council, I must acknowledge a grave error in judgment. You and your species were underestimated. Jack accepted the apology with a nod. Mistakes happen. It's what we learn from them that matters. Over the next few weeks, more visitors came to Nexus 7. Vesper scientists eager to study the living metal evolution. Then, finally, a human ship arrived. The rescue mission sent in response to Jack's original distress call nearly a year ago. Kirkio. Human Captain Lisa Chen was speechless when she saw what Jack had accomplished. NASA is going to flip when they see this, Martinez. They sent us to recover your body, not whatever you've become. Jack laughed. It felt good to be around humans again, to hear human expressions and jokes. What I've become is the caretaker of something special, and I'm not leaving. Captain Chen didn't argue. No one could argue when they saw the station, felt its living presence, understood what had been created here. 1 year to the day after being abandoned, Jack stood in the newly created observation dome, a huge bubble of transparent living metal that offered a perfect view of the stars. Ships from 3 different species were now docked at Nexus 7, with more on the way. The station had become famous throughout known space, the place where human ingenuity had transformed failure into unimaginable success. Nova's voice came, to him, not through the walls this time but directly in his mind. Are you satisfied with what we've created, Jack? Jack watched as the living metal of the dome shifted slightly, optimizing its transparency as a nearby star brightened. The station was still evolving, still learning, still becoming more than anyone had imagined possible. Yes, he answered, the blue patterns on his skin glowing in harmony with the station around him. This is exactly what I wanted to build, not just a place to survive, but a masterpiece. And as Nexus 7 continued its journey through space, it carried with it the ultimate proof of what humans could accomplish, turning abandonment into opportunity, disaster into art, and certain death into magnificent life.